Stephen A. Smith, is Golden State's dynasty done?
Yes, it is.
Is this the way they go out?
I hate to say it, but these are the final days of this dynasty.
On June 13th, 2019, Klay Thompson tore his ACL while going up for a dunk in the NBA Finals against the Toronto Raptors. This injury all but cemented Toronto as the 2019 NBA champions and also ended one of the greatest super teams we have ever seen. At this moment, it didn't look so well for the Warriors. Doubt filled the air all around the organization, and it seemed like one of the most dominant dynasties of all time had finally reached its demise. But listen, you can't kill what doesn't want to be dead. This was nothing more than a setback for the Warriors, and they didn't waste any time trying to get back to the stage. But what if I told you this was just the beginning? What if I told you what you thought was the end of an era was just the beginning of another decade of dominance? Prior to Klay Thompson's injury, the Warriors were in the midst of one of the most dominant stretches in NBA history. They had made it to the finals 4 times in a row, this being their 5th, had a record of 3-1. They had missed the playoffs since 2012. They had achieved the best season in NBA history when they finished with a record of 73-9. Then they followed all of this up by creating one of the best super teams of all time. But tension was starting to form. Early in the year, KD and Draymond had a yelling altercation during the game against the Clippers, and many people believe this was the moment KD realized he no longer wanted to be a Warrior, and the injury he suffered earlier in the finals marked the unofficial end of his time in the Bay Area. And after Klay went down with his injury, the future was bleak for Golden State. Klay was going to be out at least 12 months. KD wanting to leave was the worst kept secret in the entire NBA at this point. And not only were the pieces around their core beginning to age, but the engine of it all was getting old as well. Steph Curry was now 31 years old and possibly nearing the end of his prime. So this upcoming stretch will be very crucial for the Warriors. Whatever decision they made over the next couple of years had to be, and I mean had to be, ideal for the foreseeable future. They started this retool off by drafting Jordan Poole out of Michigan with the 28th pick in the 2019 draft. Poole was a 6'4", 6'5" combo guard in Michigan who offered scoring but was very raw, and many people saw this as a reach at the time. Next, they agreed to a 5-year, $190 million max contract with Thompson despite a long and grueling rehab process ahead of him. After this, they would agree to sign and trade with Brooklyn that turned Kevin Durant's departure into D'Angelo Russell and some role players. And with the re-signing of Kevon Looney this offseason as well, this concluded the 2019 offseason for Golden State, and it didn't seem like a bad start. Sure, the Poole pick looked like a huge stretch, but you got a good return for KD, and you re-signed 2 key pieces of your team. Now, the next season ended before it ever really started when Curry suffered a hand injury that would end his season after only 5 games. The only notable moment of this season came when the front office decided to trade D'Angelo Russell to the Minnesota Timberwolves in exchange for Andrew Wiggins and 2 picks. Golden State finished the year with a 15-50 record, the worst in the NBA, and in the lottery they got the number 2 overall pick. They took James Wiseman, the athletic big man from Memphis who could deliver a presence inside that the Warriors hadn't had in a long time. But this dream of returning to the mountaintop was quickly dashed when Thompson tore his Achilles right before the 2020-2021 NBA season started. But on the bright side, Curry proved he could still play the MVP level, and he wasn't slowing down anytime soon. The Warriors would finish with a 39-33 record and miss the playoffs after losing to Memphis in the play-in, but with the right acquisitions this offseason, the Warriors could be back next year terrorizing the NBA like before. So they started the 2021 offseason by taking G League superstar Jonathan Kuminga and Arkansas sharpshooter Moses Moody. They followed this up in free agency by signing Otto Porter Jr., Niamani Bjelica, Iguodala, and Gary Payton II to minimum deals. But Golden State wasn't expected to be contenders. It seemed like their glory days were still well behind them. Some people deemed that the only way they could rise to contention was training for an established start in the NBA. But these people couldn't have been more wrong. The Warriors started off this season phenomenal. They started with a record of 18-2. Jordan Poole had emerged as a young star. Draymond had returned to the all-defense level player we were used to. And Steph Curry was still Steph Curry. Klay did return eventually during the season, but it was obvious he still was getting back used to the game and he struggled a bit. Still, they made it all the way to the finals quite easily and faced the Boston Celtics. The Warriors took the Celtics down in 6 in a very hard-fought series and reestablished themselves as a force in the league. But their core is getting old. It's obvious that these aren't the same guys who watched dominate the NBA a half-decade ago, and for most teams, this would be concerning. But Golden State isn't most teams though. You see, during these down years from 2019 to 2021, Golden State was able to put together a phenomenal young core, one of the best in the NBA, one that is more than capable of carrying the torch and will make sure this dynasty is alive and well going into the next decade. The job that the Warriors have done when it comes to drafting is outstanding. This is no surprise, as this is the same organization that picked Stephen Curry when everybody thought he was too small and would be nothing more than a solid role player in the NBA. And this same impeccable eye the Warriors have for talent has shown itself countless times since 2009. This past year's draft is only the latest example. With the 28th overall pick in this year's draft, the Warriors selected Patrick Baldwin Jr. You see, a year ago today, there was no way on earth Baldwin was going to be available this late. He was dominant in high school, but he turned down a multitude of Power 5 offers to play for his dad at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. He started off the season strong in his first game, but this would be short-lived as he would re-aggravate the ankle injury that he suffered in high school. And while Baldwin tried to play through this injury, he struggled on the court a lot, and it didn't look like how everybody was hoping. He eventually ended up further damaging his ankle and ended his season after only playing 11 games. His shooting from the field was horrendous, and he couldn't hit 3 of the free throws consistently, and he also had a high turnover clip. All of these things tanked his draft stock, and he went from being seen as a lottery pick to a second-round draft pick in no time. He fell into the Warriors' lap at 28, and this is no doubt the perfect situation for him. The Warriors are masters at development, and if developed correctly, he could show us why at one point he was a top 5 player in the country, or just carve out a solid high-level role in Golden State. Next, they took Rollins out of Toledo, and this immediately felt like a steal as soon as it was announced. Ryan's route is very similar to Jordan Poole's. He's a combo guard who shares many of the same strengths Poole did coming out of college. Lights out shooter, can be a floor general, very high IQ in the pick and roll, and is an amazing scorer. But he isn't as flashy as Poole was. He also came out as a sophomore, and the frames are dang near the same. The blueprint is already there for Rollins. Just like Poole, he can develop in a system and eventually cement himself as a key role player for the Warriors early on in his career. This is where the Warriors are most effective. Their ability to turn young players into immediate impact players is well documented. Look no further than Klay Thompson and Draymond Green. In their second and third seasons in the NBA, they were right by Steph's side, helping him bring the Warriors their first championship in 40 years. And just last year, they drafted 2 players of a similar mold in Kuminga and Moody. You see, coming into the 2021 NBA draft, Kuminga had quite the reputation. He was the number 1 overall player in the high school class of 2021 before he reclassified to the class of 2020. He was still a top 5 player in the class of 2020 who had offers from every major D1 college in the country. He chose to go to the G League instead, and in his only season with the G League Ignite, he was impressive. He was clearly the most versatile defender in the 2021 NBA draft and had all the physical tools you could ask for. He was extremely raw as a prospect, but the upside was more than enough for Golden State, and they selected him with the 7th overall pick. His rookie season was a roller coaster ride. He had a role kind of similar to the one Kawhi played with the Spurs early on in his career, but obviously he wasn't that big of a factor and didn't play that much. But he still got a decent amount of run this season. He showed the defensive versatility everybody was enamored with before he was drafted and had tremendous offensive performances this year as well. He became the youngest player in the NBA to start a playoff game since 1971 and showed obvious signs of growth this season, as he went from someone who couldn't even get on the court to guarding LeBron James at one point. Draymond Green has taken Kuminga under his wing and is a big believer that he could be a perennial all-star in the league that could emerge as a very key part for the Warriors in the future. Their next draft pick was Moody from Arkansas. Coming into the draft, Moody was seen as one of the more NBA-ready players in the draft, quite the opposite of his teammate, Jonathan Kuminga. He was well accomplished at Arkansas, and he served as a go-to option for the Razorbacks. He was a SEC Freshman of the Year and was an All-SEC first-team selection. Moody's ability to shoot and his overall length and athleticism was going to allow him to guard multiple positions and give him a potential as a high-level 3-and-D player. Sound familiar? His rookie year was similar to Kuminga's. It wasn't as much of a roller coaster ride, but he didn't get much playing time at the start of the season, and like Kuminga, he spent time in the G League. He was good when he played in the NBA though, and his shooting transferred over easily, like we expected, and the defensive flashes were there as well. An example of this was when Gary Payton II went out with a key injury during their finals run this year. He stepped into that role for him, and during the Mavs season, looked good, showed flashes of what he could develop to in a couple of years. Both Kuminga and Moody were impressive in the Summer League this year. Even though Kuminga struggled his first game, Moody came out blazing with a 34-point performance. Kuminga would bounce back the next 2 games after being called out by Draymond. He put up 28 and 29 points respectively, but these weren't the only 2 bright spots on the Summer League team this year. A mysterious and forgotten figure also made an appearance that impressed us all. Prior to being drafted in 2020 by Golden State, Wiseman was one of the most talked about players in the NBA scouting space. Physically, his profile matched that of Embiid. He was amazing around the rim, and he displayed an elite ability to finish the ball. He was an amazing finisher around the rim and an elite vertical threat, and was a reliable jump shot away from being the consensus #1 pick in this draft. He only played 3 games in college because his eligibility was stripped away from him due to the relationship he had with head coach Penny Hardaway. But due to how dominant he was in high school, along with his raw talent, when he fell to the Warriors at the 2nd pick in the draft, it was a no-brainer. He had a very rocky rookie year. He was in and out of the lineup all the time due to health and safety protocols, and his rookie year was cut short after he suffered a torn meniscus. This had many people confused about him as a player. He had defensive shortcomings, questionable shot selection, and he had some difficulty establishing some cohesion with Stephen Curry, and this led many the wrong way. But we have to remember, he didn't have a training camp this offseason or a preseason, so he was bound to struggle. He spent this past season swapping between the G League and watching the Warriors win yet another title, and slowly faded into the back of the mind of all NBA fans. But this summer shifted everything. It didn't take long for Wiseman to show everyone that he had been working. His first 2 points of Summer League came off of a lob, and this got his teammates up onto their feet and celebrating on the bench. His defense looked good as well, and with his first real offseason in front of him, he looked primed to take a leap this upcoming season. I mean, these guys have it all, and they look amazing. But despite everything I just mentioned, one huge question looms over this young core. Who will take over this guy's position when the time comes? It's not easy to fill the shoes of Curry. He's arguably a top 10 player of all time. He's one of the best offensive engines we have ever seen, and was at the forefront of one of the greatest dynasties ever. But his retirement is inevitable, and when the time comes, who will replace him? And despite what you may think, the answer to this question couldn't be simpler. Jordan Poole's future couldn't be brighter. But this wasn't always the case for Poole. He's had questions at every single stop up until this point in his career. He was a national champion in high school, and he committed to Michigan to play for the Wolverines. His freshman year was quite forgetful, as Poole only averaged 12.5 minutes per game, but the 6'5" guard made his grand entrance onto the national stage after burying a very memorable shot to help Michigan make a run to the national championship game. Now, obviously, Michigan didn't win the national championship because it's Michigan, but with this shot and with this freshman year, many thought he was primed for a leap in his sophomore season. This leap would never arrive. He averaged 12.8 points per game, and Poole only exceeded the 20-point threshold on 4 occasions. The full-fledged breakout year we were expecting never really happened, mostly because of Poole's individual inconsistencies on both ends of the floor. So when he declared for the draft, it was a surprise to everybody. It made sense to an extent though. He was a very good athlete who was very effective when tasked with pick and roll creation in college. He brought gravity as a shooter, and he could shoot the ball from wherever, and he flashed quick and good decision making when coming off screens and creating separation against good defensive competition. But his defense was relatively weak at times, and he could get too out of control and do more bad than good at times. For these reasons, he projected as a second round pick going to the draft, and some even thought he could go undrafted. So when the Warriors selected him with the 28th pick in the draft, it surprised everyone. This was viewed as a huge reach and had everyone scratching their heads at Golden State once again. But Poole didn't care about any of that. The guard out of Michigan was just wondering how he was going to be able to get on the floor this season. Now, he did get on the floor his rookie year, but the best way to describe his performances was mediocre. His lack of strength meant defenders could easily knock him off his spot, and his lack of desire on defense left the coaching staff shaking their heads, and it seemed like people were right. Maybe he wasn't ready yet. Maybe he should have stayed in college one more year. Some would say he was the worst player in the NBA at this point, but Poole wasn't worried. He knew what he was capable of. He just had to put it all together. So when the lockdown occurred, he grinded his butt off. He took a lot of time to reevaluate and restructure his game. He was knee-deep in film, broke it down, asked questions, everything. He found himself watching Damian Lillard step back, or the way Steph would come off a curl, and he would send it to his trainer so they could work on these things. So when the NBA came back, Poole was expecting to play with the Warriors, but they felt like he belonged in the G League instead, at least for a little while. So they sent him to the G League bubble, and while he was in the G League, he looked better than he did prior to the lockdown. He averaged 22.4 points, 5.3 rebounds, and 3.5 assists. And going into his sophomore year, though there was optimism, he still was splitting time between the NBA and the G League. But one thing was obvious. He had improved and was a much better player than he was his rookie year. And there was no better example of this than on May 11, 2021, where he would give us a sneak peek of what we will see the following season. On May 11th, in the matchup against the Suns, the Warriors were desperate for a win. They were in the thick of a playing race and were looking for someone else to step up. And who better to step up than Jordan Poole? He scored 20 points, including the go-ahead three-pointer, and opened the eyes of his predecessor. But this was only a glimpse of what was to come in the future. He was phenomenal this past season as he averaged 18.5 points, 4 assists, 3.4 rebounds on 59.8% true shooting. This was an improvement in every single aspect of his game, and he was a huge piece in the Warriors making the playoffs. And Poole wasted no time raising to the occasion in the playoffs, as in his playoff debut, he scored 30 points. And this was consistent throughout the rest of the playoffs. He averaged 17 points, 3.8 assists, and 2.8 rebounds on 65.4% true shooting. And with this breakout season this past year, he has positioned himself perfectly to build on the legacy Steph will leave behind. And the dude who, at one point, people thought he was going to go undrafted, has positioned himself to make a transition into the star role that Golden State will need once Steph leaves. But as young as this core is already, there's already a threat looming above it. You see, Draymond Green, Klay Thompson, Andrew Wiggins, and Jordan Poole are all due for expensive paydays in the near future. Paying all 4 players over the next 12 months will put Golden State's salary well into unforeseen territory after the luxury tax. So one has to go. With Draymond stating that he wants to max and Steph also vocalizing how he wants both of his running mates to get paid, it leaves the Warriors in a weird position. Do you pay Green and Thompson and risk losing out on Poole or Wiggins, and maybe even both? Or do you max out Wiggins and Poole and risk Klay or Dre leaving to get that max contract that they feel like they deserve? And to me, I feel like the only safe one is Poole. After that, it's up in the air. Poole is undoubtedly your next star and should be your number 1 priority. Draymond is the heart and soul of that franchise and is a huge influence to all of your young guys, but his max contract could 100% look like the worst contract in the NBA in a couple of years. And let's be honest, how many teams are realistically offering Draymond a 5-year max contract? As for Klay Thompson, he's obviously lost a step, and he looks very replaceable with Moses Moody and Jordan Poole emerging in the background. And finally, as for Andrew Wiggins, he's looking replaceable as well. Even with his emergence in these past year playoffs, he'll be 28 by the end of next season, and he doesn't fit the timeline for the Warriors too much when it comes to your young guys. The Warriors already have Jonathan Kuminga, so why give Andrew Wiggins a max contract for the next few years if you believe Jonathan Kuminga could not only step into that role, but be better in that role in the next few years? With that being said, which side are you on? Are you team pay the guys and feed your homegrown talent? Or do you prioritize the future and risk letting your hometown heroes walk for nothing? Let me know what you would do in the comments. If you enjoyed this video and like what you heard, make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel. And until next time, peace.